Now we're going to take a look at the second attribute, which is kink displacement. Now, much like frizz displacement, you do have a root and tip adjustment for the amount of displacement, but that's really where the similarities end. Let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I've got lesson 27 kinking loaded up here, and let's turn off the frizz or close up the frizz and talk about the kink properties. Now, what we have here is something that is very different than the frizz properties. The frizz properties took our clumps or took our hairs and moved their position, where the kink properties will actually displace each one of these render hairs. Think of it as curling each hair. We're going to use this to create kind of an afro style hair. So first of all, before we get into these attributes, let's go ahead and adjust the material properties here, and we'll have a little fun with this. So we'll pick kind of orangish red hair. Okay, and the root color, we'll sample this and just make a darker version. There we go. And I'm going to lower my specularity just a bit, just so we can see the curling happen. Okay, so let's turn off those materials. Here we go. Let's talk about the root kink. So as I crank this up, okay, I'll set this to 1. You can see instantly what happens in the viewport. Okay, starting from the root up, we start to get a displacement. Now, the displacement is based off of this amount, okay, this frequency amount. So that is the root. Okay, I'll set this back to 0, and I'll set the tip kink to 2. And we may actually set this higher just to see, but now the displacement is starting from the tip and coming back down. So when you combine the root and the tip, you can get something like this. All right. Let's take a quick render of this just so we have something that we can work off of. And there we go. We've got a cool looking afro here to get some of this initial work done. Let's take a look at the alpha channel. You can see we have very nice soft outer edges. All right, so how do we take this to another step? Well, let's talk about this frequency. If I set these frequencies to 0, okay, and 0.001 is the smallest it will go. Look what happened. Even though I set my root and tip kink to 10, now, when I render this, I'm going to get straight hairs. Okay, so something to keep in mind that even though I cranked up my root and tip kink amounts, it is all tied back to the frequency of the X, Y, and Z of this displacement. So something that's very important to keep in mind. There we go. We got our straight here, and that's not what we're looking for. Okay, so we can crank this back up. We'll try 100. There we go. And you can crank this up as much as you want. The root is going to be much stronger than anywhere, and then the tip. So be very careful how much you use on there. Now, when you do render this, we're going to get very sharp edges. So let me render this image and we'll store it. Okay, let's store this image. Notice the sharp edges. Okay, that has to do with the segments, which is one of the general properties that we skipped over when we were talking about them. So this hair segments, we kind of saved that for this lesson, is the number of hair little segment chunks along the entire length of the curve. Think of it as a NURBS curve, and these are the vertices that are involved. So let's actually crank this up. So, okay, so let's set this to 3 times the number of segments, so 30. Now, it is going to take it a second to render, but let's take a look at, here is a before, and here is the after. Now, we can crank this up even more, but we've actually so far doubled the render time. So we went from 17 seconds, which is just fine for previewing, to 28 seconds once we kind of crank that up, and we could probably even go a little bit higher. So that is a direct relation here of how curly and smooth these hairs look once you've added some root and tip kink. Just keep in mind that you do have to crank up the frequencies if you want to see that displacement along each hair. So the way you keep these separated is kink controls each hair's displacement along the render hair, and the frizz properties will control the physical displacement in position. So as I crank these out, you can see they actually are shifting. Okay, as opposed to when I crank these, they're not shifting position, they are just changing the amount of displacement along each hair.